Well, why don't we get started? We'll go through some of the housekeeping and introductions while other folks are filing in. So thank you all for joining us this morning. I think this webinar grew from a panel discussion that Margaret Malicki and Michelle Susko and I had a few weeks ago, similar topic in fundraising and donor perspectives. And a lot of the conversations that came out afterward were very much about collaborations and mergers and alliances. And we each had received a number of, pings from friends of ours. So said, maybe this is a topic that would be of interest. So thank you for joining us for this. So just want to do quick introductions of our panel and then an overview of today's webinar. So some housekeeping notes. I think everyone has access to the Q&A function. So as our other panelists are speaking, I, as both panelist and moderator, will try to pay attention to the questions. And I think in our rehearsal, we've left a few minutes at the end, and hopefully we can try to respond accordingly. Although I know a number of our panelists, Diane, Sophie, Margaret, all have some materials. So we'll follow up with a recording of today's presentation, as well as some links and other information which we think might be of interest that we just simply can't get to today. So again, thanks for joining us. Really want to give a special thanks and shout out to a few friends of ours. Michelle Susko from Roya Consulting, a fundraising consultant that we've worked with quite a bit over the last few years, has been supporting us on a lot of these webinars. Our friends at Over at Media, my colleagues, thank you for your support and time to help us produce these kind of events. And Kelly Primo Fahey for the fabulous marketing materials and outreach and graphics. So without them, a lot of this stuff isn't possible. So really, really appreciate their support for this. So let me introduce our panelists. I'll start with Margaret Malicki. If you don't know Margaret, and I know many of you do on the call, she's served a lot of nonprofits in the region, helping to support their efforts to form strategic plans and engaging the community, meeting fundraising goals. And in particular, she's served as a philanthropic counsel to more than 24 capital and endowment campaigns, raising more than a total of $112 million. Now, these campaigns have ranged from organizations with almost no or limited staff and a modest fundraising goal of a few $100,000 to organizations that are much larger, full development teams, ultimately reaching double-digit million-dollar goals. A lot of these campaigns were in support of organizations that are in some stage of collaboration or affiliation, and I think that's a lot of what she'll bring to the conversation today. Diane Cameron is Director of Development and Grants at Unity House in Troy. That's a $30 million nonprofit human service agency. If you're not familiar, she has a really fabulous career in the nonprofit sector, starting at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., was development director and executive director for nonprofit organizations in the arts and human services and healthcare and education for more than 35 years. Throughout her career, she's participated in many funded partnerships and collaborations and mergers. I was even surprised to learn how robust Unity House's partnerships and collaborations are, and there's really a few remarkable and quite creative examples that I know she'll share with us throughout the morning. Sophie Moss is Director of Development at the Albany Symphony. She supports the orchestra in its mission to share in adventurous musical programs throughout the region. Prior to that role, she held several other positions at the Symphony, including responsibilities in community engagement, operations, special project management. She's also a past board member of the Empire State Youth Orchestra, current board member of the Alumni Association of the Albany Academy for Girls, also been a recent panelist for annual conferences of the New York State Canal Corporation and the Kennedy Center Leadership Exchange in Arts and Diversity. Like Unity House, as I was getting to know Sophie, really found it remarkable the diverse network of collaborations that the Symphony has in the community, in both venue as well as programming partnerships, and look forward to her sharing those. And I'm Paul Fahey, panelist, and I'll be your moderator for this morning's webinar. I'm I'm Vice President, Marketing Consultant for Over at Media, where I've counseled hundreds of nonprofits through my career. I'm the former Director of Marketing for Proctor's, but I think most relevant to this morning's conversation is my role as the former CEO of the Children's Museum of Science and Technology. We had merged in with SUNY Poly in 2013, and then subsequently acquired the Traveling Museum a few years later. A lot of lessons learned throughout that process that I'll share with you this morning. So, welcome to our panelists. Thank you all for joining us. So, let me just start with a couple of just very quick slides to level set. I know we're each looking at this through different lenses. As Margaret mentioned, this webinar is connecting a lot of dots. We have .org, .com, .edu, and .gov, and all of us are in different places, with how our organizations are doing, but I thought I would just sort of level set and remind us of what's happening around us as if it's not obvious. But so certainly the lockdown, had a significant impact on economic activity, and that's pretty obvious. If you can't go to work and if you lock down the country, economic activity stops. Unlike other economic downturns that I've lived through in my career, I started in the early 90s. I lived through the dot-com bubble, 9/11, and the housing and financial crisis about a decade ago. Unlike any of those, this was the fastest fall ever in GDP, market value, and employment. Things that government agencies were measuring monthly and quarterly were happening and needed to be measured on a daily or weekly basis. So this is not a normal downturn, but we also know why this happened. We know why the economy went off a cliff and took a lot of nonprofits with it. But unlike our last downturn, unlike the housing and financial crisis, this time the banks are part of the solution. So we know why this happened. We have allies in this, but we've never reopened our economy before. Other countries have and do. Spain, every August, shuts down much of their economy as the country takes a vacation, quite literally. 30% of their economic activity stops, but in September it restarts again. So I think there are points of optimism ahead, especially as we're going through, phases, as New York State is doing better than the rest of the country in terms of our COVID numbers. And so as we look at the nonprofit community in general, I think it's important for us to know that the vast majority are small organizations. They have less than $1 million budget. And our region is home to nearly 5,000 nonprofits, 4,842 nonprofits call the Capital Region their home. I was really, I guess I knew that there were a lot, but until Margaret had shared this number with me on a previous webinar, I was really kind of surprised. Certainly seat of government, and with a robust education and population density, I guess that stands to reason. And a recent survey of nonprofits nationwide showed that most of them were forced to modify or cut services. Vast majority had lost revenue, had staff reduction, but we're expecting more staff and program cuts in the months ahead. And I think that's a lot of what we're looking to discuss today is, what were those solutions and what were the options? What do we hear, out among our clients and colleagues in the nonprofit sector? What are the solutions and what options are they looking for? They're challenging and asking themselves how they're going to be surviving through this. Many of them turn to us as marketers or development professionals to kind of what I call selling our way out of this. Let's just basically throw money at the problem and put pressure on, membership dollars or grants or donor relations to, work our way out of this. And then collaborations, and certainly that's a very viable option and something that, of course, we're here to talk about today. So with that, I'll start to go through a series of questions. I'll begin with each of our panelists, but inviting them to join the conversation as we're kind of going through. So let's start with collaborations. And Margaret, let me ask this of you. As we were talking, I guess there's a couple different versions of the word. Is it collaboration with a little c or a big C? And frankly, what's the difference between the two?
Thanks, Paul. So there is a significant difference between little c and big C. Little c is basically your coordinating between a couple of organizations and your programs and services. It doesn't require significant engagement. What we're hoping to talk more about today is focusing more on the big C. And that's when there's a real concentrated effort to understand what's happening in our external environment, the environment outside of our organization, and to seek out strategic alliances to move forward a big social change. It requires a lot more effort and creativity, if you will. The one thing that's not on here, Paul, I want to be sure we bring up early, has to do with a little bit more on, we have so many organizations in this area. We do see some possibility of consolidations occurring. So what does a consolidation comes right down to it, that one organization will be dissolved into another. And so if we can't get to collaborations to help the viability of our nonprofits, the reality is we could look at, be looking at some consolidations for nonprofits in the future.
Diane, Sophie, anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, I would just add quickly, there's a really good definition of strategic collaborations that the Harvard Business Review put out actually in the 90s. And they say, strategic collaborations are durable commitments created for mutual gain. And I think that that's just a really nice way of framing this conversation, that it's something that is long lasting and durable, that has mutual benefit. So not just a one-sided relationship that one partner is seeking another organization, you know, just to fulfill their needs. It really is kind of a mutual connection.
Mm-hmm.
So for our panel, do you expect to see a rise then in consolidations in particular, given the climate and what's happening around us?
Well, you know, I do believe throughout the rest of 2020, all these nonprofits are going to just eke their way out like they always have, but it's going to be even tougher in 2020. Like the for-profit sector, 2021, I think, will bring a different front for us. So I do see there could be an increase in consolidations for our nonprofit sectors as the public dollar and the donor dollar seems to get squeezed further and further.
And what I hope and I expect will happen based on history is we're going to see some real creative work that will ultimately benefit the Capital Region.
So Diane, let me throw this to you. Why should organizations collaborate or even perhaps consolidate? You know, how do they know that they're going about this the wrong or for the right reasons and you know, the right set of motivations? What advice would you give?
Right. Well, I think at the very top of the list, and I think this should always stay at the top of the list, is your mission. Doing more of your mission, doing your mission better, changing your geographic reach, offering your clients or your patrons something that you have not been able to offer them. So you have food, but no way for clients to reach it. People have jobs, but no daycare. You have a fabulous orchestra, but no safe space at this time. You know, how to come in with that mission focus. And it doesn't have to be in a crisis situation like we're in now. Another really important reason is to add expertise and critical skills that you don't have, or it's not maybe wise to invest in. So high-level compliance, high-level finance, IT, and any licensed specialty, RN, MSW, MD, psychiatrist, archivist, those kinds of things, to bring that into your organization by collaborating with another organization. An important one to solve a community issue or to solve a community problem. And I'll give you an example from Unity House. This was over a long period of time, and many good collaborations take a long time. Years and years ago, as I know the audience understands, human service organizations and the police were adversaries around domestic violence. Tremendous frustration on both sides. Police would go to a domestic call, not make an arrest. What's wrong with that? People feeling frustrated, people in danger. And at Unity House, we definitely had all those feelings. And then we decided to listen. what was going on for the police that it was so frustrating for them. And we realized the law did not support them. And so our first step toward collaboration was to realize when the police officer went on domestic call, if the victim recanted, they couldn't arrest. So how frustrating is that for a police officer? And how does that become anger? Very easily, right? So we began working, we worked with other groups, we got the law changed, and then we kept going. That's the other critical piece here. We kept going to ensure that all police officers could be trained. So with the Rensselaer County Sheriff's Office and Troy Police, we now provide training ongoing every year to make sure that officers are trained and that our staff understand the role of the police and the issues for the police. And then, bonus, it has attracted hundreds of thousands of dollars from federal money. So that really is a long-term win-win to solve a social issue. Another critical piece in addition to mission is fiscal stabilization of one or both partners. And that's probably the piece that we're talking about right now, looking at COVID impact.
Yep. So Diane, reasons why it's relevant to the mission of both organizations. It helps enhance your ability to deliver. It adds expertise. It solves a problem. You know, those are all really good reasons why organizations should collaborate, or at least know that they're going about it for the right reasons. Diane, Sophie, anything else to add to the list?
Just, it's hard to, go after Diane, but I would just say, I think for the arts organizations in particular, I think your mission, but also making sure that your mission has as much relevancy and sort of vibrancy as possible in the current environment, right? So I think collaborations also create an opportunity for you to maybe enact your mission in a new way that makes your organization more relevant to your community, more responsive to community need. And I think that that's particularly important for arts and cultural and historical organizations that might have a long history of enacting different programs, and maybe the environment, the landscape is changing. Maybe the ways that people want to engage with the arts are changing. So I think that's also really important, is maybe thinking about, is this an opportunity, how can we maybe enact our mission in a new way, in a different way, to really help engage new folks? And is there an organization, a group, a community that can help us do that better? And what can we bring to that group?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Sophie, how organizations can pivot and stay relevant during these times until they're able to get back into, their normal delivery modes. I serve on the board of Troy Savings Bank Music Hall, and last week we had an event. We're not allowed to bring people into the music hall at this point, but we still are great at programming, and we still love to bring people together, and they still want what the music hall offers. And so one of the really creative solutions was to host a concert at the drive-ins. And so, for $50 a carload, cram as many people into the minivan, you had an opportunity to still enjoy the music from the artists, but just in a different venue. So, I think those are very important bits of advice for organizations now. Diane, let me stay with you. How can nonprofits work together? What are some of those examples of things that they can do together? What should they be exploring?
Right. I think sort of from maybe the simplest to the more complex, and reflecting back to what Margaret said, mutual referrals. We do that all the time, but be looking for those mutual referrals between like organizations and unlike organizations. Where can human services work with the arts? I mean, we've saw that over the past couple of years. Proctor's, Cap Rep, and Unity House with the Troy Savings Bank Music Hall. Ambassadors. Everybody loves the ambassadors who give directions and greet people and help you cross the street and find parking and all of that. Those are wonderful referrals and collaborations. Another one that a lot of people I find don't know about unless you're in it is to be the subrecipient on a big grant. At Unity House, in all of our programs, we receive state and federal money. And a lot of times those come with an intention to partner within the grant itself. And so we're going to ask another organization to be the subrecipient to reach another population or part of the population. There is good money there. And the way that comes about is knowing each other and getting to know each other, so that when we're thinking who can be a sub on this, we think, oh, let's ask the Y, let's ask the music hall, let's ask Joseph's House, let's ask some of the folks that we know. Being a formal partner on a project to accomplish a specific thing, time limited or maybe ongoing. Unity House has partnered with CEO in Troy for years on our holiday program, on our meal programs, on our Thanksgiving, the food package programs, things like that. Again, these provide income for both sides. And then to the, the big C, getting closer to the big C here, the collaborations, which are formalized, there's legal documents, you have a memorandum of understanding. Those can also go on for many years. And then lastly, the merger, which is the dissolution of one organization, one 501c3 is in fact dissolved and comes in. And at Unity House, we did that years ago with Bethany Hospitality, a long-time meal program in Troy, and now that's our community meals. And we're right now in the process of a merger with Northeast Career Planning in Albany, so we're crossing counties as well.
Mm-hmm. Margaret or Sophie, anything you guys want to add?
Sure, I think that for the Albany Symphony, we've had a number of similar programs. I would just mention that I think for organizations who maybe don't have their own capital or buildings, that approaching your venue partner is a great way of maybe creating a natural collaboration that might already be existing, but you can deepen or expand. So for example, the Albany Symphony has had the great privilege of having venue partnerships with the Palace Theater, Proctor's, Troy Savings Bank Music Hall, among many others. And the Palace, we've had a long relationship for several years. Our administrative offices are at the Palace, and we have a partnership agreement around that. But also for a period between late 2015 and early 2017, when the orchestra was without an executive director, needed some help with day-to-day operations, needed some support on our box office, we had a shared services agreement with the Palace Theater that really helped us bridge that gap. So maybe for organizations who are going through a rough few next months or a couple of years as they transition, adapt to the current environment, maybe thinking about, are there any kind of shared services that would be useful organizationally with a venue partner or another regular partner. Similarly, we have a current partnership with Proctor's. We're part of the theater manager outlet system. So we have we share the Proctor's database for our box office and donations. All of our information is private, but we are able to then tap into the network of IT services from Proctor's, which is really wonderful because it expands our opportunities to sell tickets to our programs, to share what's going on among all the other venue partners, of which I know, Paul, the music hall is one. There are other partners in that sort of network. So Proctor's has been such a great kind of network and hub for collaboration in many ways, but I think that's also a way that the Symphony has found an opportunity to expand our reach and access through a strategic collaboration on the organizational side.
Paul, I'd like to add to Sophie's comment. When the Symphony was without a director, they reached out and they got some help. I think that it's such a valuable thing for a number of nonprofits to hear. We all need help at some point, and too many times nonprofit leadership, whether it be staff, board members, they're not, they're protected. They don't want to admit, like, we're a little bit vulnerable. We need help. And it's actually when those nonprofits reach out that they may get an increased response because other leaders in the community have been through that with someone else, another organization. So unless our leadership in the region hears from you, we're not going to know that you have this struggle. And it's okay, particularly in these times, to have these struggles, but don't be afraid to knock on doors, or today, email and call to ask for help, and just indicate that, this is what you're forecasting, and who can I reach out to?
And that's the great paradox of great leadership, is humble and vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I would also add that for the Symphony, that arrangement was really helpful in the short term. It was ultimately not the right long-term arrangement for us. So I think, again, that transparency, and we're going to talk a little later about some of the do's and don'ts, I think, but, really going into it with, as open a mind as you can, and sort of continuing to evaluate what's the right fit for you. I think it's okay, Margaret, to your point, to reach out for help, and then to later on, when a new opportunity presents itself, to adapt to that.
Yeah, and building on the last few comments, and this has come up in a couple of our other webinars, I was stunned to hear either directly or indirectly from funding partners, whether these are individual philanthropists or organizations, that their phone isn't ringing. Mm-hmm. They're telling us, please, we want to be part of the solution. We're even inviting or encouraging people to say, tell us what you need. Maybe a commitment we were planning to make in the fall, we can move up to the spring or something. And I thought quite the opposite, that their phone would be ringing off the hook, and the, just the resources, would have been tapped completely at this point. So I think that's really important advice, having leadership, reaching out for not only these collaborations, but also just even having conversations with your funding partners about how they can be part of the solution. What is it that, either guidance or advice or even resources. So yeah, you're right, Diane, in terms of that paradox of being humble and vulnerable. Perhaps we don't always feel empowered to be able to say, hey, we need help right now. It's not a weakness of our leadership or a bad mission or model. These are just difficult times, and how can we work together? So as we look at the region, I think, again, being home to nearly 5,000, I think there have been some notable collaborations and consolidations and affiliations and alliances over the last several years. And we've got a couple slides with some of the more remarkable ones. On that first row, many of us remember Northeast Parent and Child and Parsons now merging in with Northern Rivers. On the next row, I just have some individual organizations, Unity House. Diane, you were speaking about that, but Diane, I found it remarkable how many different types of collaborations your organization has going on right now.
I would say as of today, probably 35 to 40. And from subrecipient to MOU partnership to formal collaboration with shared income.
And I think I was also taken aback. I mean, some of it made sense. Health and Human Service or social programs, felt like they were all part of that. But when you started describing the affiliation that you have with, the Troy Police Department, for instance, I found that particularly remarkable. I think many of us remember the Albany Academies, the merger of, both the boys and girls schools. With that, I think, and with Northern Rivers comes, a lot of different challenges as these organizations look to, affiliate. Margaret, from where you sit, what perspectives do you have on, some of these more notable things happening in our region?
Well, there's some alliances that are true consolidations that are much more natural, like the Albany Academies. But what has to be addressed, individuals involved have true stakes in the organization they came from. It takes a long time to overcome those emotions and feelings. So while like the consolidation seems only natural, the engagement of staff and the board and the process it has to be well attended to if the consolidation is going to be successful, and maybe years before those emotions truly settle in.
Mm-hmm.
And Sophie, the Albany Symphony, on our sort of middle row there, you have both, I guess, how you might categorize your types of collaborations, both in terms of venue, but also programming. Tell us a little bit more about some of those.
Sure. Well, I would be remiss if I didn't just say up front that, the Albany Symphony is one part of a very diverse and rich arts community in the Capital Region. And we have so many wonderful collaborations and partnerships happening right now. I think for the Albany Symphony, I mentioned some of our venue collaborations, which have really been us reaching out for help or support. I think on the converse side, we, as the Albany Symphony, love to fulfill that role, maybe more on the programmatic side for other partners, other organizations in our community. So we've had a more than 20-year collaboration partnership with Albany City School District, Troy City School District, Averill Park Central Schools to provide music education programs for K through 12, which in our current environment, obviously that we're really looking at how those programs are working and what we can do to adapt to how school is going to continue, whether in person, virtual, and what to expect. But that has been a really wonderful ongoing partnership collaboration that has actually led to increases in instrumental enrollment for kids in those districts. And I think that's been really wonderful, keeping music and the arts alive in schools, also, supporting the amazing work that teachers are doing and helping to support those students in supplemental ways and advocating for, additional resources for arts education in school. That's been a main, way that we've been partnering over the long term. I think also we've found a lot of success in programmatic partnerships that have maybe started with a little C and become a bigger C over time. And I think that's one thing I would mention is I think to Margaret's point, sometimes really we're talking about these more substantive partnerships, but sometimes you get there from having smaller collaborations first. And we found that to be the case with many organizations. Some of our project work that we've done that's been grant funded and had different state partnerships, like partnerships with the New York State Canal Corporation, for instance, or Parks and Recreation or Historic Preservation, environmental conservation, have also allowed us to expand out into other areas of the state and bring in other smaller arts organizations to participate in our projects as kind of sub-recipients, to Diane's point about how you can kind of leverage larger grants to help support multiple organizations. So I would say, in our role, we love to kind of be a resource in that way and help to create an umbrella under which we can also highlight and engage other arts organizations and showcase the great work that they're doing.
Thanks. And from my experience, the two logos on the bottom row, a few years ago, I was the interim CEO for the Children's Museum of Science and Technology. And like many nonprofits, we fit into the descriptions that we've talked about today: operating budget under $1 million, no endowment, really kind of living paycheck to paycheck, but with a very robust mission. And in particular, imagine being a science and technology museum in 2013 as the region is just, rocketing upward. Global Foundries had come online a few years earlier. SUNY Poly, was really growing. And between those two organizations, you had $50 billion of investment with all the other ancillary companies that were around them. So as we were looking at being a bricks and mortar on one side of the capital region, perhaps, considering opportunities with another similar mission just didn't work out. And we approached SUNY Poly to say, hey, and going back to what Diane was saying a moment ago, we checked a lot of those boxes. We're mission aligned. We can be interpretive. We can help rubber stamp, the technologies that are helping to fuel the region and share that around the state. We added expertise, it solved a financial problem for us. And even one of the pieces of advice that Diane's going to give us, I think in a moment, is make sure you allow yourself enough time because these things can take forever. In this case, quite the opposite. Dr. Caliero said, listen, I'm interested in acquiring your organization, partnering with your organization, but don't waste my time if you guys can't get this deal done in less than 2 months. So unless your board can sign this deal in 2 months, let's decide. So, what we'll learn, and this will be a good segue, I think, to our next slide about the do's and don'ts, is that, sense of, even though you might be perfectly mission aligned and there's so much that makes sense about it, that clash of cultures going from, the nonprofit culture into a very, very agile, perhaps aggressive, for-profit entrepreneurial culture was, I think a bit much for us as we were going through, and some lessons learned in that process. So let's make that segue. Actually, I think we've covered some of the Unity House and Symphony thoughts on our previous slide. Sophie, let me start with you. Help us make a list, and Diane, Margaret, please jump in. What are some of those do's and don'ts that organizations need to keep in mind as they're going through this process?
Sure. I think the next slide might have some more specifics, but I think the common themes are maybe not to box yourself in when you're thinking about collaboration. So I think thinking expansively, maybe beyond your immediate neighborhood into the capital region as a whole, maybe even statewide, national, international partners. I think also really thinking expansively about the types of partnerships, not just within your own sector, but also cross sector. So that could be for the arts, looking at a human services collaboration for within the nonprofit field, or it could be looking at collaborations, partnerships in business, local government, education, faith communities, et cetera. So really thinking about, once you kind of have an idea of what types of collaboration you might be looking for, really trying to think expansively about where you could find that. I think the other bullets here are really about giving yourself enough time, being transparent, the process around how to approach the collaboration. So I think honesty, transparency, making sure you're being attentive to building trust, I think both within your organization, but also with your collaborator, and really being thoughtful about listening and really having a two-way relationship, not only imposing what you want, but really listening to the other organization and their needs and goals at all levels of the institution. And then I think for the don'ts, I think these first two bullets are actually really tough for nonprofits to grapple with. I think funding can be a really attractive motivator. And also I think funding can also often spark really meaningful, authentic projects, that do have long-term impact. So I wouldn't discount that. But I think the key takeaway here is that not to simply chase something based on funding that maybe isn't within your mission, isn't really where you want to focus, or maybe isn't quite the right fit or the right time. Using obviously opportunities, resources to your advantage, consulting your funding partners, consulting your community, getting their expertise, advice to figure out how to make something happen, but really listening and staying true to your organization and what it is that you are here for in terms of your mission. And again, those sort of cultural differences that organizations have, being attentive to those as well.
Yeah, Paul, I would add in here, I would emphasize, do real due diligence, not reading their annual report, not their 990. You want to go much deeper than that. You want to see X number of years past financials. You want to see how those financials changed. And you want to spend some money. If you're talking a big C collaboration, a real partnership, or heading toward merger, you want to pay for legal services and a CPA to do that due diligence, not pro bono, not somebody's sister-in-law, but it's going to be worth it in the end to know what actually really happened and happens inside that organization. And then I think sort of the parallel do and don't, you do want to talk to funders and prospective funders. What do they think of that organization? What do they think of this idea? And then on the other hand, don't let anyone automatically matchmake you. Because again, it's going to be culture. And they can be two organizations, similar missions, but if the culture is different, you're going to suffer for a long time, and probably until there's a lot of staff turnover.
And one of the things, just to emphasize the don't making money the primary motivation, I think from our experience at the Children's Museum, yes, we were very much mission aligned, and the timing we thought was perfect. In fact, I think it still was. However, part of our motivation was making money, part of the reason why we were doing this. We were treading water financially, and we saw this as a potential solution. So during the announcement, Dr. Caliaros had said, with this merger comes a future $5 million of investment, and imagine how that sounds to an organization with a $1 million budget that's treading water. One of the things we knew going in was that was going to really hit our donor relations. Well, you clearly don't need my $300 a year. You've got some pretty deep pockets. So that might be a unique example, but it was certainly something, I think, to really underscore, Diane, your and Sophie's point about, making sure that money isn't the primary motivation overall. Anything else to add before we move on to how we can find these? So Margaret, let me ask you, how can organizations, find collaborations? I mean, it does sound pretty obvious that you just sort of look around, but I think there's a bit more to that.
I would say like the primary characteristic for an organization that collaborates is they're proactive. And sometimes they're out there understanding what the community's needs are without necessarily knowing what they're looking for. But the more you're out there, you're discovering what is happening in the audience that's external to the walls of your organization and the programs that you have. And by getting yourself out there and involved with other organizations, for profit and nonprofit, you start to understand what others offer that maybe, actually, I think we could work together in a way that could be strong. Or opposite, you start to see things that you don't do that others do well, that you could see the relationship growing because you could work well together. But when you stay in the confines of your office, and I know I'm saying this today when so many of us are confined, but without looking outside and truly understanding, you're not going to find these collaborations. You have to be proactive. So during this time, when we're more confined, how are you more proactive? We can still email, we can still set up phone calls, and you may not harness anything new out of these conversations, but you're going to learn. And maybe 6 months from now, you'll have a recall on a conversation with the symphony, what they were doing related to something with schools, but they had trouble with something, a piece of that later you can fill in. I am finding getting onto webinars hosted by a number of different people, I'm learning so much more about the activity in this region. So I encourage you, get on LinkedIn, follow people, see what they're up to, sign up for their programs, listen in, because that is part of your discovery. You won't know until you start to do that participation. The participation we want from our volunteers, we've got to be doing it ourselves to better understand the community. So I think that proactive piece is the most significant. And don't just look to the nonprofits in your sector. Look to those that are also dissimilar to you in different parts of the nonprofit world. But then I love witnessing what's going on in the for-profit world, because I think there's so many things that we can learn from them. And there's no reason why we can't partner with the for-profit sector as well and ask a lot of questions. I know I get lots of emails from different organizations that ask questions. I'm happy to be a part of that conversation. I have some knowledge to impart, but I love to learn more from others. So I think you'll find if people are in this line of work, we're attuned to that and welcome the conversation. And when you're talking to leadership donors, corporate donors, foundations, that's inherent to the personalities of the people involved with those organizations. So don't be afraid to reach out.
I want to echo that, because I think one of the things probably all of us do, we think we know what other nonprofits do. And I know this at Unity House because we're 5 populations, and people will say, oh, you are a DV organization. Oh, you are a children's organization, because that's the part they've encountered. But I've done the same thing. Who knows that the Humane Society has a DV aspect to it? That's a collaboration, right? They're sheltering pets for DV victims, but you wouldn't know that unless you were living in that situation. I think we make a lot of assumptions by sort of the front of the building or the front of the annual report, but we need to read other people's. Now that we're home, read everybody's website.
Mm-hmm.
I would add also, kind of going off of Margaret, what you said, I think all of that activity, I think you said something about staying connected, even if you don't really know what you're looking for, even if you're not really sure what you're out there for, being connected. I think all of that activity also yields a reputation as being an organization that is open to partnership, right? And I think That down the road means that other organizations may be reaching out to you with opportunities or collaborations if they see you being active in the community, if they see you reaching out and caring and wanting to participate. So I think it's sort of, if you don't do that work to demonstrate that you are actively and proactively looking for partnerships and looking to be engaged in the community, people may not think of you automatically as a partner, as a resource. And those kind of partnerships, the Symphony has been approached about several different things as a result of being more active in the community, that have yielded really wonderful partnerships that really involved someone reaching out to us, but we wouldn't have had that outreach happen, you know, at maybe an earlier point when we weren't as active in certain areas of the community.
And I think, Margaret, going back to your thought about taking cues from the for-profit community, one of the sayings that I've learned a few years ago was that M&A is the new R&D. Mergers and acquisitions is the new research and development. And so I looked at a number of either my clients or organizations that we've even acquired and said, well, we could try to solve a problem. We may identify and see a need in the community, but by the time we learn how to do it, hire the staff to develop it, figure out how to fund it, you know, we could be getting up to speed much, much faster through just simple either partnership or acquisition. So wanted to share, I guess, that insight. Any other thoughts before I move on? We have one last slide on before we go. So one of the last questions, I want to make sure we left enough time for this, and also encouraging folks, if you have anything specific, please drop them into the Q&A, or we'll try to leave some time before we wrap up at 9 o'clock. But I think this is important, understanding what donors like about collaborations. Why is it important to them as much as it might be to the organization? Margaret, let me start with you.
So financially, if a donor has the opportunity, whether that be individual, corporate, or foundation, to maximize their investment, they like to see that. But a more mission specific, if you can have deeper impact, that's really drives for higher donor engagement. Higher donor engagement drives more investment. When they see sectors working together, when you're a leadership donor and you're very familiar with the different nonprofits in the area, they like to see the organizations working together to have a deeper desired change. And just, you know, we're not doing this to increase donations, but to have deeper impact. But it's funny how the donations increase when you do this type of work as a collaborative effort. But it's pretty simple why donors like to see the collaborations. It's a deeper impact and to deliver social change that couldn't happen without partnerships.
And I've even seen a few examples, I think, over the last 10 years or so, where a few donors even got together to encourage collaborations. You know, I see redundancy, I'm writing 2 different checks, you know, any chance you folks can come together, you know, create some efficiencies. Sophie, Diane, anything else on that?
I think one of the things to remember, and, you know, I like to remind people of this, is donors have missions too. You know, in a foundation, it may be stated more overtly. So make sure we understand what their mission is, and the collaboration is going to help that. But individual donors have missions, whether they're stated or not, what they care about, what they hope their legacy will be, what they want for their grandchildren, what they want for the community that they want people to come and live and work in, and matching up those missions across segments.
It's particularly in the last decade, Diane, we have seen so many individual donors really have a defined mission. As you said, may not be written, but they have a particular focus, and understanding that is critical.
Right.
Yeah. So again, want to encourage folks, if you have any questions, we'll leave a couple minutes at the end. Please either type them into the chat, or we can even have folks go unmute themselves. In the meantime, let me just kind of ask our panel, any parting thoughts? If there's one thing that you want to make sure that the audience, keeps in mind, or one particular tip or piece of advice or perspective, what would that be? Diane, let me start with you.
Thanks, Paul. I think the most important message that I would like our audience to hear, especially if you're new to the nonprofit world or new as a board member or staff member, is the nonprofit community is very generous and very helpful. 99% of nonprofits want to help you and your nonprofit. We are not competitive in the way I think that often people fear we are, because we know people have missions and it's going to be the mission for that person. So don't be afraid to pick up the phone. Don't be afraid, as Sophie said earlier, to not maybe even completely know what you're looking for, but to say, have you ever thought of, would you consider, I'm wondering about this, and the all important, who do you know? And then the other thing, in any level of partnership, invest the time in the relationship. Because it is the relationship which will make or break that collaboration, and you need trust. You can only move forward at the speed of trust, so that takes time.
Margaret, how about you?
Well, I think for me, I would say don't be afraid to lean in, and it sounds awfully similar to what Diane is saying. But I know from my own work experiences, when you gather people from varied disciplines, we have the most fun working towards a goal, and it's the most rewarding in the end. But it didn't happen because we stayed isolated.
Mm-hmm.
By leaning in and just asking different people to help gather around the table, jump on Zoom, have a conversation like we are today. I think for us as professionals, we have a more rewarding experience. For the community, they are recipients of stronger programs and services. So lean in.
Sophie.
Well, I feel very humbled to be part of such an outstanding panel and also such great folks who are listening in. And as maybe a more junior part of the arts leadership community, I would just say that I think anyone who might be listening to this who is maybe newer to the field, as Diane was saying, not only know that nonprofits are helpful, but also feel empowered to bring ideas and opportunities for collaboration back to your team. And I think if you are in a position where you are maybe a leader in your organization, in your field, I think really think about how you can empower folks at all levels of your organization to be thinking about this. I think we often think about collaborations and partnerships as kind of the head of one organization and the head of the other organization. And that can be a really wonderful collaboration. But I think in this new world, and as the environment changes, the more we can be inclusive and thinking about folks and how they might be considering collaboration, how we can grow and adapt and change, I think that will just make us better organizations. So I think just thinking about who you have at the table when you're talking about collaborations and how you can empower folks to bring ideas and not to feel maybe a little bit wary of bringing their idea to the organization, really creating that culture of opportunity and collaboration.
Thanks, Sophie. From my end, my parting thought would be to encourage people not to underestimate the emotion that goes into these collaborations from both ends. I think there can be a significant amount of anxiety and hesitation, but also maybe even enthusiasm, and making sure all of that is just run through a very inclusive and open process. As somebody mentioned before, very good, transparent communication with the staff, with donors. I think all of that goes a long way to alleviating the concerns and the emotions that really bubble up during this process. I have a few questions coming in. So Margaret, go ahead.
That's what I was going to say. Just to alert you, a couple questions came in.
Sure. So one of them, and actually, thank you for asking. I think this question puts our conversation in the context of what we're all living through and the fact that we're delivering this at a webinar instead of a meeting space. So with many of us working from home, does this open the door for shared spaces in addition to shared services? Let me ask any of our panelists.
I would say absolutely. I think we're all looking at where we have big rooms, you know, we have boardrooms and meeting rooms that we're going to put 4 people maybe in for a meeting, like Margaret was saying earlier, but also knowing that could be available to someone else. And I think this also goes back to the issue of sharing professional expertise. You know, who has the CFO, who has the chief compliance officer, so that that can save space and dollars.
I know that Interfaith Partnerships new building on Upper Sheridan Avenue, they had a number of rooms on the 2nd floor on one of the buildings they renovated, and they have different program services come in and use those spaces. It's up until, you know, COVID, when there was a lot of interaction. It was a terrific model, and also included an office for Albany Police, the on the beat kind of police department in the neighborhood. They haven't gone as much as shared financial services, but you know, some of that infrastructure stuff. But you can't rule it out. I think, and even when we talked about collaborations, we've got to be open to possibilities and what will make our organizations most efficient without compromising mission.
Any other thoughts on that, Sophie?
I would just say, representing an organization that does not have our own space, we have found many organizations, both for-profit and nonprofit, to be incredibly generous in providing space, as Diane and Margaret were mentioning, for meetings, for conferences, for other types of events. So I think definitely if you're an organization that has access to space, thinking creatively about how you might use that, maybe to support a community need, but also possibly as a tool to provide some income. I know that a lot of organizations, you know, use that as some rental income for various different things. So if that's not something that your organization already does, maybe something to think about and think creatively about in this sort of age of social distancing and what that means. Maybe outdoor spaces are a viable, you know, rental income for you. Maybe there are things that you haven't really considered before that are now open. So definitely thinking about those different opportunities.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, I think, you know, being a more virtual society, I think it opens us up to removing barriers that we might have otherwise had, logistics or even geographics that limited, you know, what we were delivering or who we were partnering with. It does perhaps pose a potential problem if we're not careful that, you know, we could start to dilute our focus and get into some mission creep. But I think the benefits into this virtual world, you know, for the time being, I think are going to be pretty important. I have no doubt most of our organizations are going to pivot back to, you know, a bricks and mortar, you know, presence. You know, I think those are in some cases, I remember Philip Morris once describing Proctor's, wanting to think of Proctor's as the community living room. And so there are missed opportunities when we can't bring people together. Ideas don't happen as fast as Margaret was saying before our call. She actually had her first in-person meeting yesterday for the first time since March. And I think remarking about how fast the ideas kind of came forward, and it felt even more productive than it might otherwise. But it's certainly, I think this, you know, virtual world is going to be with us for months to come, I think. So any other questions? I know we're right up against time right now. Didn't see anything new coming through. I'll just mention quickly, we'll send out a thank you email with a link to the video for this webinar, as well as contact information for each of the panelists. Folks may have questions that might either be a little sensitive or self-serving that might not be relevant to the broader group. So encourage you to reach out to anybody, you know, if you'd like to chat further. So on behalf of all of us, thank you for spending time with us this morning. I hope you found this of value, and hopefully it's helping your organization through. Diane, Margaret, Sophie, thanks for joining us. Any final thoughts?
Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.